Okay, God never meant for us to do life alone. But let's be real, friendship as a busy mom can feel often more like a battleground than a blessing some days. If you've ever felt the sting of loneliness, the weight of doing all the initiating, or the ache of friendships that just fade away, then this episode is for you. Did you know that 58% of moms report feeling mom loneliness? Or that nearly 1 in 4 women say they have no close friends at all? Y'all, that is not okay. That's not just sad, it is a soul ache that we're not talking about enough. In this episode, we're going to get very real about the why, the what to do about it, and the truth that connection, deep, life giving connection and friendship, is not just a luxury, it is a lifeline. Let's go.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenilee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this. Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me here at Java with Jen. How in the world do we, when we are moms, especially when we have young children, this is where I've heard a lot of moms talk about loneliness, isolation, and just the depression sometimes that can set in from that, especially if you just had a baby and you've got a little postpartum. It can be even worse if this is not a strong area of your life. And so Miss Kristen Strong is an author who's written a book called Desperate Woman Seeks Friends. I just love the title of her book. And so she's going to actually talk about this because this was an area that she really had to work through as a military wife. And she has gone the ups and downs. And we wanted to bring this to you guys because I realize many of you may have been frustrated in this area, may still be frustrated in this area, or may not realize this is maybe what your soul has been looking for. And this is what you've been struggling with is friendships and cultivating those in motherhood. So a little backstory on Kristen. She's a respected author and an encourager whose work includes Girl Meets Change and Back Roads to Belonging. Kristen has a meaningful online presence, shares insights on faith and friendship through her website and contributions to platforms like Dayspring's Encourage. So that's a very quick glimpse at who she is. Kristen, thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jen. I am over the moon to be here. I'm a born and raised Oklahoma girl, so if you hear a little accent, that's where that comes from.
Okay, well, now you have a lot of military in your family, it sounds like, between your son and your husband and all the people. And so that sounds like it was kind of the basis for how you came to this book that you wrote and the struggles that you walked through.
Yeah, Desperate Woman Seeks Friends. And I'll say first, that title comes from when we lived in the Dayton, Ohio area the second time. And it was very different. I'd lived there before, but my friends had either moved or it was just a very different situation. So I felt like I could not make friends, even though by that point in time, I knew kind of quote unquote all the right things to do. It was not happening. And so this was 2005 before social media. So I told my husband one night I was going to get some poster board and I was just going to write on it, Desperate Woman Seeks Friends, and stand in our yard with it. We had a corner lot, so I thought maybe somebody will drive by and see it and be interested.
That's hilarious.
So yeah, that's where the title comes from. But really, this topic is just something that I feel like God has always brought to mind, and maybe it's because I struggled with friendships. I was not born with a natural, ability to work a room or just to have great interpersonal skills. And I grew up in Osage County, Oklahoma, on O'Neill Lane, and so my maiden name was O'Neill. Everybody's last name on O'Neill Lane was O'Neill. I grew up with familiarity and family, like expansive roots of family. But I went to college an hour away to Oklahoma State. And that's where I met David Strong. And he was going through ROTC to become an officer in the U.S. Air Force. And we, fell in love, got married. And so, hitching my horse to his wagon meant I was going to be moving out of Oklahoma and moving too. And he left for training not long after we got there. And I remember just looking around going, oh my gosh, I went from knowing what felt like everybody and to knowing not a soul and realizing I had no clue as to how to make friends. We got married after my junior year. I transferred as a senior to a new
Oh,
college, and that's sort of tricky. A
yeah.
lot of people already kind of have their people. And I just felt like, oh, well, they'll see I'm new and,
Be
and
friendly.
like be friendly. And that's just not the way it worked. And I didn't know how to put myself out there in the beginning. So
Yeah.
that was the learning curve I had to go from that to, thank the good Lord, having a great set of friends today. But it was a bumpy
Yeah.
road in the middle.
No kidding. Okay, so you hit on, so really I'm thinking now there's so many different scenarios that we women can find ourselves in that present the challenge of creating new community, finding new
Hmm.
friends, right? Getting integrated. And like you, I moved to Texas when I decided to marry my husband. And so I remember for a whole year feeling like all the friends that were around me weren't really my friends. They were his friends that felt bad for me, so they hung out with me, you know?
Yes,
And
yes.
so I remember, even though I had people around me, I still could feel kind of lonely because I didn't feel deeply connected, and I was still trying to sort that out. And so I felt like an alien, in foreign territory for at least a year. Thankfully, they were pretty friendly, but it sounds like you didn't necessarily have that same experience. And then so some women, it's maybe the transition of moving locations. Maybe your husband gets moved or whatever for his job or whatever. Sometimes it's,
Mhm.
we start having babies. I know that's a big one. I've heard a lot of mothers of young children saying that they will go for years without really cultivating
Mhm.
friendships because they just feel kind of like they're surviving the day to day of babies. And then they feel guilty for doing anything outside of the kids, which is
Mhm.
kind of unhealthy, but we do that to ourselves. And so what is it that makes it so hard to make real friends as an adult? And what have you seen? Because obviously not everyone has the military move around
Right.
background, but you've encountered, I'm sure, many different ways and reasons why women might struggle with this. What is a common denominator behind what makes friendships so challenging?
Yeah, and I'll add to that my husband retired from the military about 10 years ago. So I know now as somebody who's not constantly relocating how hard it is to still make and keep
Mm,
friendships. Other people move, seasons of life change. So
yeah.
yeah, you don't have to be married to somebody certainly not in the military, but even somebody who has a more transient job or
Mhm.
you don't have to be changing locations to still struggle to have friends. That's a very real reality for so
Yeah.
many of us. I think there's a couple of factors as to why it's harder now. I think number one, we are just busier people.
Mhm.
In my research for this book, Desperate Woman Seeks Friends, I learned that generations today, we spend twice as much time with our kids as generations past. So,
Oh, wow.
that's significant. And so
Yeah.
if time is a pie, that's a less slice for friends.
Yeah.
Plus, it's just real easy to back burner friendship. We know that marriages, romantic relationships, those take intention and work. Familial relationships certainly take intention and work.
Yeah.
Certainly if you're a mama and you're a mama of littles too. But we don't always think of that same thing with friends, but friends takes work too. It's
Mhm.
kind of an art and a skill that has to be nurtured, or it's just easy to like I said, let it fall off the back burner.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons. And I think two, we are just more fearful of being vulnerable. And that is sort of the key thing. When I was researching this book, as like I mentioned earlier, another thing I found was this fantastic book by Drew Hunter called Made for Friendship. And he talks about how we've turned friendship into a cruise ship. Like we know a little bit about a lot of people, but what we need is a submarine. We
Mhm.
need just a couple of people, a few people to go deep with, and that's what makes you feel like you're set to go. You like just having a couple of friends that you feel like you can share your good, bad, and ugly with, as opposed to 100 folks that just know a little bit about you. Well,
Yeah.
one's just much more soul filling
Yeah.
than the other one. So I would say those are two factors in our modern society. We're just more individualistic also,
Yeah.
but that's some of kind of what's feeding that problem.
That makes sense. I was talking to my husband a little bit about this last night. We were actually out to dinner with some friends, which it's amazing how hard it was just to get our schedules to align, right?
Yes,
I think it took us a
yes.
month to actually get to dinner. And but in the process of dinner, I was trying to share with them some, exciting things that had happened with my podcast guests I'd had on my show like yesterday. They were Hollywood legends that I got to meet and was so
Oh,
encouraged about. But something I've processed with my husband, we're senior pastors and we live, our church is out in the sticks in Orange, Texas. And I have a lot of friends who know nothing about what my world in podcasting is like. And so I was telling him, I was like, babe, sometimes I feel like I live in two totally different worlds where I have to keep them separate because this world over here doesn't know anything about this world. And so it's hard for them to connect with it. And sometimes when I share about my podcast, people look at me funny and it just falls flat. And I end up feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have shared that. And so I share that because I think sometimes we women can experience that if we have an unusual situation in our life, maybe you're a military spouse, maybe you have someone you're caregiving for your older parents, but none of your friends are. Maybe you have a child with, who's crippled or has some kind of disorder that makes it harder for other parents to relate to you. And so sometimes maybe if we have these difficult scenarios that make us feel unique and different than the general masses, that can make it a little harder to find the people that are our tribe, if you will. Would you agree? Is that a barrier we encounter?
yes, I would say so. In fact, I would say in my earlier writing days, 10 years ago, I published my first book.
Hmm.
And I would say it was kind of hard for me to find friends that seemed to be, and these are friends, like actual friends, but they didn't really, if I brought it up, like you said, it felt flat or like they couldn't relate or, there was just something in it, like it was just a disconnect.
Uh-huh.
And so I know what helped me in that area though is to find friends in the writing
Yeah.
lane that did get it. And so I know, and now I would say today, I absolutely, my ride or dies, I can share all those things with.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But there have been friends, like I totally resonate with that, how sometimes, and that's really hard when you feel like you can't bring your whole self to
Hmm.
that person. So when you find that friend that you can bring your whole self to, I mean,
Yeah.
you just want to hold on to that because that's a gold mine right there.
Yes, 100%. Okay, so what would you say to moms that would ask, what do I do when I feel like I'm always the one giving in my friendships, but no one is there for me? Because I have multiple friends who have complained about this. Even my sister, she lives in Los Angeles and it's been Long Beach now, but it's been very hard for her to cultivate friendships over in the Hollywood space because it's a very different culture there. It's like the
Mm.
culture there is me and my own world, dog eat dog. I'm just here to make it in the industry and move on. You know what I mean? So it's the
Ugh.
culture there is not real connecting. And so she feels like she has to work twice as hard to find friends or people who even want to connect, even if she initiates. And she's like, I'm just tired of being the one who's always initiating. And I've heard
Uh-huh.
so many people say that. What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, I've been that person, completely understand that. And just how frustrating it is to feel
Mhm.
like you're putting in a lot of work. You're trying to get the harvest to come in and it's not coming. Well,
Yeah.
I would say, though, too, I'll have something more encouraging in a minute. This won't sound as encouraging, but this is the truth. That is just more often the case than not. When you
Yeah.
are actively trying to find your people, it will feel like you are putting in way more work than you are getting a return on. And I have probably said that to a dozen plus people myself about myself. So, there's that as well. And I guess the encouragement in that is that you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
But the more encouraging piece to that is that those skills are not wasted. What you are doing to build those friendships, even if you're not getting the return yet, I truly believe, by the power of the good Lord above, you will reap a harvest with that. It's just taking longer than you would like,
Yeah.
and I think that, in putting forth that effort,
Uh-huh.
it's just one of those things that, if it's a nuanced thing because it's great to put in effort, but I would just caution, if there is one of those folks you feel like this has been a long time coming, a long time going, I should say, and I am doing the work of both of us. Then I would just encourage you that maybe that one's just not meant to be the friend in your life, and to
Yeah.
pivot your efforts towards another potential friend. And I get knowing kind of when to fish, when to cut bait is sort of tricky. I've had friends, in extreme grief, or I've just been in a really busy season, thinking of that times when my kids were middle school, lower high school, no driver's license, but in a lot of activities. And my address was the minivan. I wasn't socializing as much. I was socializing in the parking lot, if you want.
Yeah.
And sometimes friends will do that. They'll meet me in the parking lot, except they often had their own things going on.
Yeah.
But so there's grace for when somebody's going through something, and maybe they can only give you, give you nothing, or 10 or 20%. But then there's those times where you're just feeling like you keep putting in the effort. It's okay to cut bait and pivot towards those who will cherish the delight that you are.
Yeah, 100%. Now, what role would you say attending church plays in the ability to cultivate friendships? How big of a role do you find that playing?
Well, I mean, I can speak personally. For me, it is a big role because our church life is an important part of our life. But I think what helps a lot with going to church, church is just a great place where you are routinely meeting the same people,
Yeah.
and they say it takes 200 to 300 hours of time spent with somebody to develop a deep friendship. It's like
Wow.
50 hours for a casual one, but 200 to 300 hours, so, you're kind of chipping away at that, a
Yeah.
church is a great place to do that. So I would say it can be hugely impactful. However, I would also say you have to talk to people once you're there,
Yeah.
if you're just going, sitting in the pew, and then, skedaddling as soon as the sermon's done, you've kind of got to put in a little bit more effort than that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's a proverb that says that he who has friends must himself be friendly. And
Yes.
I just remember that principle is there. Like, scripture doesn't let us ever get away from wearing responsibility. And so, what have you seen are some of the best things? Like, especially, some women will feel like I'm tired of putting in all the effort. There's probably a point where boundaries may be necessary, like particularly if someone is a little more of a vampire friend, maybe pulling,
Hmm.
pulling, pulling, but not
Right.
really offering depth of connection. So what do you find for people who maybe they need some boundaries in some relationships, but the relationship still isn't quite hitting the spot as far as that connection that she's looking for in friendship?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know definitely talk about boundaries in the book. Boundaries are our friends.
Yes.
But boundaries are also our friends' friends. And so sometimes we are on, and sometimes I think boundaries just need better PR, because our world has boundaries. If I pull up to a stoplight, it's green for me. I trust that the other cars are minding the boundary of the red light,
Yeah.
So like that's just a part of life. And so sometimes I think boundaries, if you just look at them as they
Safety
are
zones.
safety zones. They
Yeah.
are they're a way of relaying information of how available we are to other people.
Hey friend, I'm interrupting the episode real quick because if you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, but you didn't know where to begin, it can feel super overwhelming. I remember. And so, in order to help you, I'm hosting a live 4-day challenge to help you kickstart your own podcast the right way. I have learned there are right ways and wrong ways to do this thing. And so, we'll nail down your core message, define your ideal listener, and figure out how to create episodes that really connect with and magnetize your audience. Plus, you'll get the perfect name, subtitle, and a catchy hook statement to make your podcast unforgettable. This challenge is coming up soon, and I'm offering it at a super low ticket price just for my listeners. Want to get started? Click the link in the show notes to grab all the details. I can't wait to see you there.
I was able to ask a question on Facebook, asking some of the women, like, hey, what are some of your common concerns and feelings around cultivating friends as a mom? And so I want to read a couple of these and ask your thoughts on them because they hit some really important talking points that a lot of moms, I think, relate to. And so one of them was, she said, the struggle I had was thinking friends would just come to me, and taking a decade, which we've kind of talked about, taking a decade to realize that I have to be a friend to have a friend. If I don't reach out, if I don't serve, then we're not going to get into the grit of life and form true friendship. The huge gateway to transparency into a person is being willing to dive into someone else's mess with them and let them know you're not afraid of it. I feel like that's when real
Mm,
friendship occurs. She said that so well
she
because
did.
she made a great point that we lead with serving, and like vulnerability invites vulnerability. To be a friend, to have a friend, you must be a friend. So maybe speak to that idea of
Mhm.
what serving plays in cultivating real friendships.
Yeah. Well, I think just yeah, like you said so well, Jen, being the kind of friend you want to have. That looks like, if your friend is telling you, gosh, my husband and I have not, or we haven't been on a date in I don't know how many months. Can you use that opportunity to say, you know what? I can watch your kids Friday, or and just being there for them because I likely it's my history that they will reciprocate at some time as well. you know, Thinking about when the friend's birthday is and just offering a birthday text. It doesn't mean you got to buy a gift, but just a little gesture that knows she's seen and remembered. If the flu is running through the house, can you just sit some chicken noodle soup on the front porch? Things like that, just small gestures done with great love just go so far to endear you to others and to be the love of Jesus to others. And there is, I'll tell you, that is awful attractive to somebody, and they're going to have a hard time getting being annoyed at that. That's just not going to happen. But by and large, 99% of the time, I think those efforts are wildly appreciated. And just even like after the kids are in bed, can you go on a walk together? I used to do that with a friend after we put the kids in bed, we'd meet up for a walk, or we'd meet up at Target and stroll the aisles together.
Yep.
you know
Oh, we did that.
yes, yes. And so, and just being a kind, gracious friend. I'll tell you, we these days we are all so hard on ourselves, I feel like. And we're all generally feeling a little bit like we're not up to the ideal that we now have the opportunity to see, so many people what they're doing. And so when you just do something like that out of love towards
Mhm.
them and not expecting anything in return, although in God's economy, you're going to get a return anyway,
Yeah.
like that's just going to go so far to show that person and to show that person that, you see them, and it's a friendly gesture that really is helpful for fast tracking to a meaningful friendship.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when my kids were little, my friends that I had who also had young children, I would arrange 2 or 3 times a week play dates because,
Hmm.
especially those of us who had the privilege of staying home with our kids, we would spend the days just trying to figure out how to not lose our minds with our kids going crazy in the house. So it kind of solved that problem. It got the kids out of the house, and then we got to have some time together. So we'd meet up at the park, we'd go shopping, we'd go, wherever, the water park. And so doing things like that did a lot for making us not feel alone, and we felt like we had camaraderie in that season. But another
Yeah.
thing that I did that I didn't realize how effective it was until I left that church, was once a month or so, I would reach out to a few of the moms that were in my general season of life. And I'd say, hey, on Friday night, see if your husband can put the kids in bed at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. We're going to meet up at so and so's house, and we're going to have decaf coffee and cookies. And we're just going to do facials and talk until we're blue in the face. And they're like, yay. And so everyone would kind of arrange that Friday to leave their kids with their husband. And then we would all meet up and talk until 2 in the morning. It was awesome. And it was
Yes.
it was something we did from time to time. So what were some of the things you were able to do to cultivate those friendships?
Yes. Well, I had like these categories I put those things into. I love what you said because that's exactly one of them. I had showing up, opening up, and praying up. So showing up was, showing up where people are.
Yeah.
Because like unlike when I was a brand new newlywed, I just sort of acted like, you know, God was just going to drop friends on my front porch. And that's just not how real life works.
Yeah.
I had to get out and about and put myself in cross paths where I could cross paths with people. Like we talked about church, like if you like cooking, if you like painting, joining a class, is exercising your thing, looking for potential friends there. So showing up at places where friends were, when my kids were real little, I should say, we would do like the library story time or Barnes and Noble story time, things like that, and where other moms would be, because that's the nice thing about younger kids, the mothers come with them. Then also opening up, like what you talked about, having play dates. I often did that as well. Just listen, I will make a mess of chicken nuggets and apple slices, and we moms can talk while the kids eat and then run around the backyard.
Yeah.
But opening up your heart or opening up your home is so powerful, because there's something about it that is akin to opening up your heart. There's a little bit of vulnerability there that people respond well to. Just to be invited over and not have to worry about a particular meal, or even not even a meal, just if you're offering a cup of coffee, or a seat on the front porch. All people want is like a clean place to sit, and then that's it. Like they don't care about anything else. There's no need to turn yourself inside out, making your house look like a museum. Nobody can relax in a museum anyway. And I love what you said, like once a month. I think when you combine those practices with rituals, that kind of does the thinking for you. If you're like, listen, moms, the fourth Friday of the month, my house is open. Come over for decaf coffee and cookies, and we'll just sit and chat. Like then it's on the calendar, and it's it feels like less work to get it to pull together, and then you can arrange childcare ahead of time and whatnot. But also, I'm just such a big believer in prayer. When you pray to the good Lord above, you are partnering with him for his will to be done. Jesus walked this earth with friends. So if he, who was perfect in every way, if he had friends, then it is God's will for us to have friends. Scripture talks all over about when we pray in his name for the Father's will, we'll have what we receive. So the Lord wants you to have friends. You're not the exception to that.
So share your wisdom with us on one thing that Taylor actually commented on my page. She said time is the biggest issue, and she gave such a great illustration of the struggle that she came to. And I think a lot of women deal with this. She said, where do you find the time when your kids are supposed to be a priority? For example, she said, I finally got invited on a girls' trip in a few weeks and arranged everything to be able to go. But my son's baseball tournament got rescheduled to when other than the only other weekend she had plans, right? So it overlapped. So now if she misses the baseball tournament to go on the girls' trip, she'll be riddled with guilt. But if she doesn't go on the girls' trip, she's going to miss out on this opportunity to cultivate these friendships that she's been working on. And so what would you say to a mom in that position? Because as moms, we want to show up at all of our kids' things. That mom guilt thing is very, very real. And I think a lot of times it's an exaggerated form of helpfulness, like it gets to an unhealthy degree. So talk about mom guilt and balancing those things.
Yes. Well, first of all, I know I've been there as well and had to make that choice many years ago, but still I remember the mom guilt thing. And I would say, first of all, to her, there's no wrong choice. Whichever one she chooses is not incorrect and will be fine in the long run. I would say, the son is likely to have more baseball tournaments. So, if you go with the friends, I have a feeling he'll be fine. I bet he's got another cheering section there anyway, at the very least, dad. So siblings, maybe even grandparents, I think he would probably be fine. Yeah. However, your girlfriends will also still be there for the next one, although listen, it's like scheduling Tetris to get everything to iron out. So, I don't know the exact particulars for her scenario, but I would say the son, if he's probably going to be in more tournaments, if he loves baseball and like this is his thing, then I would go on the girls' trip, honestly. and because I can look back now, let me tell you, looking back now with 25-year-olds and a 21-year-old, those things that I thought my kids might remember or cause them guilt, they are not even on their radar. They don't even remember. They don't even remember. Yeah. So I would say just cut yourself a break, and if you decide to go on the trip, please do and enjoy it, because your kiddo will be fine, and he wants you to enjoy yourself too. Because when you come back refreshed, it's like a fresh oxygen mask. You feel great, and you're a better mom.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I would say, like, as pastors, when it comes to church stuff, if there's a conflict between a church event and something my boys need me for, I will always choose the boys. But
Yes.
there are those small instances that are the exceptions to the rule. So maybe a good principle here is go 80-20.
Yes.
80% of the time, prioritize your kids, and that's what they will remember. But 20% of the time, like, the reality is that 20%, the exception to the rule does exist. And if it's, I feel like if you haven't been on a mom's trip, kind of like what you were saying, he's likely to play baseball again. You haven't been on a mom's trip, my goodness, go on that mom's trip. They're going to enjoy a
Hmm.
refreshed mom a lot more than a sad, worn out mom. Okay, we'll hit this last one, and then I want to dive into your book a bit more. This last lady said for her, the issue with developing friendships is having a child with behavioral disorder. She often feels judged, and so she just stays home with her. Not a lot of people can handle her outbursts. That's a real struggle right there.
Oh, that is a real struggle. I think a lot of times we feel maybe intimidated by something. And I read a quote this morning by author Holly Girth. She says that the antidote to intimidation is intimacy. So, because I would think that the thing to kind of combat that would be just to get out with friends and saying ahead of time, listen, this one may have some outbursts going on. And if it gets to be too much, I'm just going to take her home. But would you be willing to at least try?
Yeah.
And almost think maybe that could bring about some, that would help ease her insecurities with a person or two who would be able to handle that. And then it's like, okay, well, when the outbursts become real distracting, we'll head home. But I would just encourage her to keep going and keep trying until she just finds that person that can, that she just feels comfortable with, and that where it works out. And maybe her kiddo gets more comfortable the more he or she does it as well.
That's true. That's a good point. And I think too, because I feel like now that I think about it, I've had friends who their kids, when they were dealing with some health issues, were more on the outburst side. And it was just, we just realized that's a season of life you got to walk through with your kid regardless, And so we just
Yeah.
kind of walked through it with her. And but also we also kind of catered to her as far as what's going to be easier for your kid. We will just go do that. So like,
Mhm.
think about situations where your kid is less likely to have outbursts. If that means playing at the Chick-fil-A play place, maybe that'll work great. Maybe that won't
Right.
work so great. Maybe they need to be home. And so catering to what the needs are of that child and mom, and then just building the fun around that environment.
Yeah, and so exactly, I think that's great. And so that mom saying right out of the gate, I'll definitely set myself up for success if we're at the Chick-fil-A play place, or
Yeah.
if we're meeting at a park. So can we do that?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I am sure I am sure there would be some gals that her friends, some of her friends would be more than willing to set her up for success in
Yeah.
whatever needed to be done, because that mama needs the connection time as much as anybody.
It's
So.
true. When my kids were, I had four boys under 6, and
Oh.
I remember that there was just, we didn't take them to restaurants for like 4 years because it was like chaos. And I'm like, I promise, I discipline my children, but they are boys and they are hungry, and this is not ideal scenario right here. So we would meet up at places with play places because at least they could burn off their energy while we ate. Lots of kids are difficult kids. Sometimes it's a season and you just got to be flexible and work around it. And sometimes I would say, I'm going to go meet up without any children because I need to relax and not worry about my kids.
Yeah, and absolutely, that is 100%. And kind of like with the last question, there is no shame in missing bedtime here and
Yeah.
there, or getting a sitter and heading out during the day. You need that time, and you come back a better mama. I mean, I certainly always did. And you remind me of a story when my twins were 2, and we went out to eat with my in-laws, and my twins. And again, we were disciplining parents, but 2-year-olds are 2-year-olds,
Yeah.
and they were just throwing food, and it was just, my father-in-law was like, well, this is a circus. And So it was like, we're doing the best we can here. They were very sweet and understanding, but yeah, there's seasons where it's, it is just going to be more challenging,
Mhm.
but it won't last forever.
It doesn't
So.
last forever. Okay, so obviously there's a whole spectrum of questions and concerns that moms have and challenges that we have around building friendships. So talk about your book. What was your
Mhm.
primary goal in writing it and addressing these issues? And what can women find if they were to go pick up your book?
You bet. Well, I think my primary goal was speaking to the gal who feels like she's hearing all this. This is all fantastic. This is lovely, but I've tried to make friends. I came, I saw, I tried, I got the t-shirt, and it is just too hard. And women are tricky, and no, thank you. So, so I mean, I've met some of those, and there's been seasons where I almost, became that because it was like, oh my goodness, why is this so hard? So I have such a heart for that person. And so, I really had her in mind when I was writing this book, but not just her. You don't have to have really been, feel like you're done to, I think, get something from this book. But if you do find that it is just hard to make friends, I do believe this book is a resource for you. What I tried to do in it is kind of address two sides of the coin. There's the side of being a good friend to yourself. And so therefore helping you through things that helps you bring your best self to others. So you don't inadvertently sabotage friendships, kind of just being in a healthy mindset and knowing you are worth getting to know. You are worthy of having friends. You're not the exception to the rule, but also listen, I tell on myself more than anybody else in this book. For example, I used to have a propensity for vaulting high expectations on people. And that's like Ann Boskamp says, expectations kill relationships. And that was often my experience, making sure I'm aware of blind spots I might have that may be hurting my friendships or, even, and it's stuff I have a great group of friendships, but I'm still often thinking about like, okay, I want to make sure I'm, for example, not domineering the conversation. I want to make sure I'm a good listener as well. And it's not just, here's Kristen's diary every time we're together. Also, how to be a good friend to others, and that looks like dealing with mean women, because let's not pretend like mean girls go out the window after high school. That still happens, but also like when a friendship you loved and cherished ends, and so I have a chapter called "When a Friendship Ends Without Your Say So," and because that's just I mean, that I've had a couple of those where it hurt more than I think like breaking up with my high school boyfriend. You know what I mean? It was just really painful. Also, yeah, how to deal with boundaries, how to, what to do to level up your friendships and be a good friend. And also just to know that at the end of the day as well, that we are going to fail each other. So how do we not get wrapped up in, cutting a friend off over a garden variety mistake? That's Pope Francis had said we live in a throwaway culture, and sometimes our friendships are the casualty of that. We're not necessarily as forgiving. The cancel culture and all of that plays into that, but also at the end of the day that Jesus is our only friend who will never fail us. And so cultivating friendship with him, because let me tell you, nothing helps my friendships with people than me working on my friendship with Jesus. That is what will absolutely make you a better friend to others.
That's so true. That's so good. Your book sounds so robust and practical and rich, and it sounds like you cover all the bases. And I realize in this episode, we've kind of focused in on motherhood and friendships because that's the people I usually hear talk about it. But do you address it for single women as well? Like people who maybe they're not a mother, but they're still struggling with cultivating friendships.
No, it is whether you are 18, single, married, widowed, it's for anybody.
Okay, excellent. Well, then, those of you who are listening, it sounds like this would be a great book to get. If you have struggled with cultivating friendships, which let's be honest, I think we all have at some season in our lives. We all have for various reasons. And so it's always good, like Kristen was just saying, it's good to get a refresher on, am I being a good friend? Sometimes we develop habits or hurts that do unknowingly sabotage the quality of our relationships. And it's good to sometimes get a fresh take and self-evaluate and go, oh, this was some really good tools in here. So go check out that book. If you know a friend, or you know someone who's maybe that is one of your friends that has been struggling or feeling lonely, maybe grab her this book and see if it'll just encourage her soul and make her not feel quite so alone in the journey. So, Kristen, thanks so much for sharing all of this. Where can people find your book?
Oh, you bet. Thank you so much for having me. And they can find it wherever they like to buy books: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian Bookshop. Also, you can check out my website, KristenStrong.com, and that's Kristen. At KristenStrong.com, I have information on that book and my others as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about a topic that we haven't tackled before, but is so relevant and so important. So thank you for your heart here and what you're sharing with the women.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jen. It was just such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, thanks so much for listening. Share this episode with a friend. We kind of hit all kinds of different concerns around friendship building and having friends. And so hopefully this was just kind of like a smorgasbord of delightful tastes around the topic of friendship. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss next week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store, where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.